All right. Looks like we are live. Am I doing the introduction or are you doing it, Karis?
You're doing the introduction, but I wanted to thank everybody for coming. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. We're back now, and I'm going to pass it over to our moderator so we can get back into it. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Whoop, whoop. All right. So we are here. We are here to talk about love versus story. And if you guys have never seen me before, my name is Chelsea, better known as CM Lockhart, and I write books about Black girls who aren't all that nice. And we are here with an array of amazing authors to talk to you today. So we are going to keep this short. We're going to keep this brief. I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to get right into this. So, panelists, are you ready?
Ready.
Yes.
Let's do it. All right. So first up, we have Brianna Peppins, who is the author of the YA contemporary novels, including Briarcliff Prep and As Long as We're Together. She was raised in PG County, Maryland, and graduated from Spelman College with a BA in psychology. And shout out to Spelman because I'm also an HBCU grad. So whoop whoop. All right. We also have Crystal Marquis. All right. We have Crystal Marquis with us, and she is the New York Times bestselling author of The Davenports, her debut novel, and happily spends most of her time in libraries and used bookstores because we are like to be financially responsible around these parts. So we are also here with Charlene Carr, who is the author of 9 novels, including her latest release, Hold My Girl. A lover of stories, she lives in Nova Scotia with her husband and young daughter. Also, congrats on your newborn.
Yeah, now 2 daughters.
So we are also here with Khalees Rowe, who is a stay-at-home mom and former homeschooler who writes Black young adult summer love stories. After a Twitter pitch competition success, her debut novel, Finding Jupiter, sold in a 7-way Big 5 auction. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
She writes out of her suburban home near Austin, Texas. We are also here with Julian Winters, who is a best-selling and award-winning author of contemporary young adult fiction. His novels Running with Lions, How to Be Remy Cameron, and The Summer of Everything received accolades for their positive depictions of diverse, relatable characters. And last, but certainly not least, we also have Kai Harris, who is the author of What the Fireflies Knew, the first fiction title from the Tiny Reparations book. A writer and educator from Detroit, Michigan, she uses her voice to uplift the Black community through realistic fiction centered on the Black experience and currently lives in the Bay Area, where she is an assistant professor of creative writing at Santa Clara University. This panel is stacked, and I am so glad that I get to talk to you guys. This is going to be great. All right. So, first question, so we can kind of get off the ground and get to know everyone. How did you get into becoming an author? Like, is it always something that you wanted to do? And if you weren't an author, what would you be doing? I'll go first. I got into it because I was like, ooh, I love reading. This is so fun. I should do things that are fun. And I thought it was going to be easy. And reality check came really fast. If I wasn't an author, I think right now I would say I would either be a voice actress because I'm playing around with doing audiobooks, or I would be a chef because I like to eat. So those are my 2 options. We're going to go clockwise, starting with Brianna. What about you?
Hi, everybody. I jumped into being an author after I kind of fell out of love with psychology in the way that I thought that I would be practicing it. And so the summer that after I graduated from Spelman, I moved back in with my parents, and they were like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I'm going to write a book and see how that goes." And so I did, and that ended up being Briarcliff Prep, which was my debut novel. But if I wasn't writing, then I would have gone into clinical therapy and worked with teenagers anyways. So, yeah.
I love the pivot that went from psychology to writing books. I feel like that was such a journey, but I'm glad that you made it.
Thank you.
All right, Julian, what would you be doing and how did you become an author?
Oh my gosh. I don't even want to think about what I would be doing. I became an author because I actually hated reading in, my early years, especially in high school when all they gave me to read was The Outsiders and The Great Gatsby and all that.
Fair.
greatness. So I would go home and write my own stories, and I fell into fan fiction, and I did that for so many years until an author who was secretly writing fan fiction messaged me and said, "Hey, you should really turn this into like an original work." And so I was like, sounds nice. Doesn't sound like sustainable, but sure, I'll try. And that's how I started writing Running with Lions, and it was life-changing for me. If I wasn't an author, teen me thought I was going to be a lifeguard because I was obsessed with Baywatch. So clearly I had no idea what I was doing then. But also secretly wanted to get into baking because I love being in the kitchen. So kind of like what you were saying about, wanting to be a cook. That's me too. I just love to bake. So I secretly would have did that.
I feel like you could still have that as a calling, but we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that.
All fair. We discuss this.
Yeah. All right, Crystal, your turn. How did you get into writing, and what would you be doing if you weren't an author?
So I got into writing from my younger brother. He wants to be an editor, and he was doing NaNoWriMo and writing his own stories. And I had gotten to a really bad reading slump. I couldn't find anything that I wanted to read. And he challenged me to write what I want to read. He's like, write the kind of story you're looking for and you can't find. And so that's how I got into writing. And if I wasn't an author, I would still be doing my day job. I'm in environmental health and safety, and I have a background as an EMT, so I would probably still be doing that full time.
Okay, so if any of us pass out on camera, we know who to call. Appreciate that. All right, Kai, your turn. How did you get into authoring, and what would you be doing otherwise?
Okay, I guess I'm probably similar in the loving to read club. I always loved to read. I tried to write when I was younger, but I thought it was way too hard. So I stopped trying, and I just, or I would just write for fun, like poetry or little plays or things like that. But then I went to grad school, and there was the option to take a couple creative writing classes, and I ended up writing the story that later became my novel. So it was a bit later, I guess, before I really started writing. But once I started doing it, then I was just like, oh yeah, I'm in. What would I be doing otherwise? Well, I'm a professor now, so I guess I might still be doing that. But more likely, I would probably be a wedding planner.
Oh, that sounds fun. Chaotic, but fun.
I don't know why. That's always been my dream. I actually planned like a couple people's weddings back in the day because I was trying to start like a little wedding planning business, and it was just so much fun.
I'm so glad that you had a great time. As someone who had a wedding once, I was like, never again, Jesus, never again.
Yeah, I didn't like planning my own wedding, but I like doing other people's.
Okay, I can see that. I can see that. All right, Khalees. Kellis or Khalees? Am I saying that right?
Khalees, like the singer.
Okay, I thought so, but I wanted to be
Khalees.
sure. Khalees. All right, how did you get into authoring, and what would you be doing otherwise?
Well, I studied psychology and marketing in school.
Ooh.
And so I worked in market research for advertising, designing surveys, doing focus groups and things like that. And it's work that I actually really, really loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have still been doing it after I had kids, but my son needed a surgery when he was born. So I ended up being a stay-at-home mom. And I did that, as you said at the top of the session, and homeschooled until he was in 5th grade. Now, I wanted to go back to my field after he was, off into homeschool. Out in the public school, but I couldn't, it was just a different animal after so many years. And so, I've always had a dream, to write something, thanks to people encouraging me through the blog that I used to keep. And so I just decided that before I tried to go back into the workforce, I was going to write a book of my dreams, which was Finding Jupiter. And it obviously had the journey that it had. So if I hadn't written Finding Jupiter, if my son hadn't gone to public school, I definitely would probably be a stay-at-home mom and homeschooler full time. I probably would never have put him in school. But I wanted to take that time for myself. And so here we are.
I'm glad you did, because we need more books like yours in the world, and I'm excited.
Thank you.
And absolutely last but not least, Miss Charlene, how did you get into authoring and what would you be doing otherwise?
So I've always wanted to be an author, right from I was 4 or 5 years old. When they say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" It would always be like a teacher and an author, or as I got older, a social worker and an author. I studied English literature in school with kind of the intention of being a professor and thinking that I would write on the side. Uh, and as I got into that academic world, I realized, actually teaching literature was a very small part of what most of my professors did. It was like mainly trying to get grants and everything like that. And so I kind of stopped that and I started my own communications business with the intention of being able to write on the side. And then we actually faced a lot of infertility problems. And my husband moved and I realized like I can't keep a full job. And like also not take meds because of my endometriosis and issues. So I just focused on writing for a few years and trying to conceive. And that's kind of the long and short of it. What came out of that.
Sounds good. I'm glad that all the journeys that we took to get here kind of ended here because it's like we need more books, especially with Black and brown characters at the front. Because if you guys don't know, I run the Melanin Library. And so whenever I see, I said this at the beginning before we were like recording, but like whenever I see y'all's books on the library or anyone's books pop up, I'm like, yes, look how far we've come. Okay, more books to read. Because I remember as a teenager, I was like, I just want more books with characters who look like me as the main character, not the best friend, not the side, not the, you don't get to be magical. You're not the chosen one. And it's just like, we have corrected that. And I'm really grateful for that. And so that also kind of makes me wonder, like, as the authors, what kind of impact when you guys were writing these, what did you hope it would have on your readers? Right? Y'all said y'all want to pop up. So I want to channel my inner teacher. And we're going to start with Charlene because we ended with her. So impact.
Yeah. So for me, I think a big thing was just showing a Black character simply as herself, as you said, someone who's not on the side. And it was really funny because when I wrote this character, like I just wrote her. So my book Hold My Girl, and Catherine's the main character, and she's a mother going through an IVF switch. And so she happens to be very well off. She happens to be educated. And then the other main character is a white woman, and she's just in dire straits. Her life is a mess. She doesn't have a lot of money. And so when I was pitching it, people were saying like, oh, it's so nuanced. Like, I love the way you decided to switch from the stereotypes of the Black woman being the one in distress and the Black woman being the one who was uneducated and didn't have money. And I was kind of just like, I didn't do that intentionally. Like, it's just... that's not how I view Black people. And like, she's just a person. She's an individual. She's not a stereotype. And so, just putting that out there in the world and having readers of other ethnicities as well see like, she's just a person like anyone else. She's not this like image of what a Black person is. That often happens like in too many books of just the struggle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that actually makes me want to ask another question because you guys are all traditionally published. So that is a completely different beast than putting the book out yourself. So, and we all hear the stories floating around on the internet of like getting pushback whenever you want to, like you said, break those stereotypes. So how do you guys feel about that actually having been through the process? What is it like to write Black characters who do not fit into, I'll say, the neat predetermined boxes for those characters?
If I could answer that, I like that you started talking about being self-published, because when I started writing Finding Jupiter, it was like a passion project, and it was the early 2000s, and at the time, publishing, we were not seeing books that were soft classic love stories featuring two Black American teenagers. Those weren't the books that were being purchased in publishing, and those weren't the books that were being promoted. Like, I remember when Nicola Yoon's books, became popular and they got, we got those movies. It was such like a relief to see a Black girl being pursued and loved and being the love interest. um, which is beautiful, but we still were not seeing books, like Finding Jupiter, where there were two, Black American teenagers falling in love. So I was going to write it, and I was going to self-publish because publishing wasn't buying books like that at the time. So I was like, well, I'm writing this story. I'm going to get rich on Amazon, and just do my thing. But then there was a cultural shift during the pandemic when George Floyd was murdered in front of everybody, and publishing, the film industry, everybody was like, wait a minute, we entertain ourselves a lot with Black pain. We need more, humanity. And so Finding Jupiter kind of came in during that kind of a sweet spot. Whereas if that cultural shift hadn't happened, I don't think, I think I probably would have gotten pushback or no push at all with a book such as, what I've written, because there wouldn't have been a demand for Black humanity is such that it was after the racial uprising.
Yeah. So that kind of raises the question as well of, do any of you guys also feel like after 2020 and, like you said, that big cultural shift, the way your writing was perceived and you as a Black author was perceived just kind of changed for better or worse, right? Because there are always two sides to a coin. How's that experience, 2020 versus even 2024? Because I think we're seeing another major cultural shift from, okay, we did that. We put out our letters, we did the performance, but the performance is over. Curtains have fallen. How do you guys feel about that now? If you can talk about it, this is a safe space. I hope this is a safe space.
I will talk about it. I hope that it's a safe space. I experienced something similar with Escalise in 2020 when there was that cultural shift. We were always seeing on Twitter authors saying how hard it is. In 2020, after those protests happened, there came a bunch of editors and agents coming online offering just their help and their assistance, which was lovely. And so I was one of those people who was about to query. And so I reached out to the people who said that they would help as far as my query letter went. And I got some amazing assistance. And from that query letter, everybody who responded asked for a full of my book. And at the time that was Briarcliff Prep, which was, like I said, lovely. And then it was the same as I got my agent, Jazz Perry. We ended up going out, and my book was acquired very, very quickly. And one of the things that they were saying was, with anyone who we would talk to, is that we're really looking for Black books right now. Like I said, awesome, it's great. And then the cultural shift came quickly, in my personal opinion. I ended up publishing in 2022. And by that time of them having acquired so many of our great books, when it came to marketing our great books, there was a deficit, I guess we could say. And so that was just my personal experience, and still dealing with the fallout of all of that, I guess you could say, at the same time. But it was nice at first. It was really, really great. And what happened afterwards was expected. So.
And I think that's I'm so sorry. Please continue.
I was going to say, I think for me, I had a similar experience. My book was acquired very quickly, and I did get a lot of feedback of, oh, these are the types of books that we're looking for. We are looking for more representation. And I think, to answer an earlier question, was that the cast of my character is inspired by a true story. The Davenports are inspired by C.R. Patterson and his family, who their patriarch had escaped enslavement and started this very lucrative business that he passed down for generations. And mine was more exploring that part of history that isn't really talked about, that's not taught in schools, and highlighting the Black Wall Streets after the murder of George Floyd, and then the anniversary of the Tulsa Race Riot and Massacre, stories talking about Black success, entrepreneurship, Wall Streets were something that people were looking for. And I think that really helped my book stand out and get the well-received treatment that it got at that time. And it's just, I think it came at the right time. And I think I was very fortunate in that respect.
Yeah.
Eh, I've heard a lot of what what you guys are saying and vocalizing. It kind of floats around the internet in bits and pieces. So it's always um, interesting to actually hear your perspective firsthand, right? So that being said, though, we are in 2024, and this panel is specifically talking about the joy that we write into our books, talking about love. So how do you guys balance that in your stories, right? Because you want love, you want the sweet, the fluff, the I love it, kicking my feet. Okay. But you also have to add in, growth and development. So how do you guys go about adding that into your stories and making sure there's a balance to it? And Kai, if you want to take this one, or Julian, because we haven't heard from you guys yet.
Okay, yeah, I'll go. That was something that was super important to me from the start, because so I feel like as Black authors, there are pushes in different directions. There are going to be some people that are like, ooh, write about your trauma. And then there are going to be some people that are like, oh, don't write about your trauma. Like I've been told like, oh no, we just only want Black joy, right? So to me, both things are a problem, because I don't want anyone to tell me that I can't write about my trauma, or that I can't write about my joy, or that I'm obligated to do either one. I just want to write what I want to write. And so for me, it was always important to like find my balance. And that doesn't mean that every book I write will have the exact 50-50 balance of those things. It just means that as I'm working on projects, I'm prioritizing like what I'm passionate about with telling that story. And I'm just trying to stay true to that, no matter what anybody else is telling me, even if that's my agent or my editor or whoever. I'm just trying to say like, I have to remain true to why I'm passionate about this. And, there are certain things that I can take feedback on, and there are certain things that I cannot. And that's been a huge learning path for me, and also just like getting comfortable enough to do that, especially like as a debut author and somebody who, has imposter syndrome. And I'm like, oh, do I even know what I'm talking about? But when my first novel came out in 2022, I think that the reaction that I received to it showed me that I had done what I was hoping to do. My story is a coming of age story about a young Black girl, and I wanted to try to capture what Black girlhood was like. And when I was thinking about it, and when I was thinking about the like shared experiences that I've heard of from family members or friends or, other people who have experienced being a Black girl, there were certain things that I wanted to put in there that I was like, these are the kinds of things that happen, right? So some of that is joy. Some of that is harder stuff, right? I, included a very hard topic in my novel that I had people come to me later and say like, why did you put that in there? I wish you wouldn't have put it. I even had, when I was, querying the book and trying to get an agent, I had people saying to me, if you take that out, then I'll rep you, And so, but I was like, well, this particular issue, 1 in 4 Black girls will experience it before they turn 18, right? So maybe I don't put it in the novel, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And it'd be, hard for me to say that I'm trying to portray this experience authentically if I'm going to shy away from talking about things just because they make people uncomfortable. So, I tried to have that balance, but even beyond just joy and trauma as like this kind of binary or whatever, I was also like, sometimes it just feels very regular to exist as a Black girl. I think people feel like I'm always either in the midst of some very dramatic life story, or that like I'm over here living all of these like TikTok fantasies about Black joy and I'm just dancing in the streets. And I'm like, sometimes both of those things are true for me, but sometimes I'm just doing like really regular stuff. And I try to capture a lot of that too. So there's like a scene that goes on for pages in my book where my character's just learning how to, clean and cook collard greens with her granddaddy. And it's so like slow, but it was also just a moment where it's just like, yeah, this feels right. This feels like what it's like. So, I don't know, I've maybe gotten away from the original question, but those are some of the things that I was thinking about as I was trying to balance those priorities.
No, I'm glad that you touched on it because I feel like that's something that collectively and as the bookish community, we should talk about more when it comes to Black fiction, where it's just like sometimes we just exist. Like it's not always struggle or magic. Like those are not the only two options. Sometimes we just sit in here being like, wow, today was rough. I could really go for like some cereal in bed and nobody talk to me for the rest of the day. Right? Sometimes it's just that simple. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, adding that into the story because I feel like in its own way, that's a form of showing love for Black girlhood and what it is to just exist. And, I say this a lot and I will continue to say it, but simply existing as a Black person is enough. Like, we don't owe the world anything to be magic, but that's a whole other conversation. And I'm not going to get on a rant, but I did want to ask, you, Julian, how do you get that balance? And then also, second question, so y'all can be thinking about it. What? How much pushback are you guys allowed to have with traditional publishing? Because I know that's a question that a lot of people on the outside have. Like, can you push back on your cover on the edits? Because I know you touched on it, Kai, is saying that you weren't going to cut some things out, but like, how much flexibility do you get with that? Think about that after Julian explains how he keeps the balance between plot and development and love and everything in your books, because you've done it multiple times.
Yes, so we're assuming that I know what I'm doing, right? This is
Right.
the assumption here. Okay. I mean, honestly, I go into every book thinking about the love story first, just because I never got to see that growing up. Every movie and TV show I watched, when it came to Black love, when it came to queer love, it was always so depressing that I always go in thinking, oh gosh, I really want to have like this really, deep layered relationship, but I also want it to just be these characters existing and just being themselves, and that's where the love grows from. And also just trying to write stories. I definitely get where Kai is coming from, where it's like I go into every book like, oh, well, do I have to talk about joy or do I have to talk about pain this time? And it's like, I can do both. I will, no matter what happens, I will always be Black. I will always be queer. So I will always navigate this world differently than the majority. And so that's what I think about when I'm writing. It's like, I can talk about joy, I can talk about pain, but it's always going to be a bit different for us than it is going to be for someone who's non-Black. So those things automatically bleed into the story. I don't have to really position them in any particular way because it's just our existence. At the same time, I always think, what is it like to just to show us having regular experiences, just being ourselves, whether that is cooking collard greens with you with a grandparent, whether that is dancing around in the kitchen, or whether that is just falling on our face and falling in love that way. That's what I think about when I'm writing, is just showing how we can just exist normally, just like anyone else. We deserve those same kind of stories. And so that's how I find the balance, but I'm ever not going to write a book that where a character doesn't get to have a little bit of anger and a little bit of joy, because I think that's important to show. I think it's important to show Black people that we don't have to earn our happy endings, because that's what was taught to us. We have to do certain things. We have to exist in certain ways in order to have happy endings, in order to get those magical, wonderful moments, when in actuality we don't have to, and we shouldn't be told the story over and over again that if I fit into these nice neat little boxes, I will get what everyone else gets from birth. And so that's a big thing for me. It's just showing that we can exist as angry, as happy as we want to be, and still deserve, not earn, deserve that happy ending.
Amen. I second that, because I am, again, if y'all haven't learned anything about me, if y'all take nothing away from this, know that I'm very pro-Black and very pro-Black stories. And I'm just like, you do not have to earn your emotions. You do not have to earn a place to exist. If you're angry, you're angry. And that does not make you an angry Black woman. That just makes you a Black woman who's angry because you probably did something to make me in this state of mind. But we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. There's so many layers and there's nuance to it. So I love when I get to dive into a book that's like, okay, it's more than just specifically Black girl magic or Black boy joy, or it's just specifically trauma. And I'm like, ooh, this was heavy. Was not prepared for this, So that kind of, like I said, bring us back full circle to the question that I told you guys I was going to ask, which is, how much pushback do you get when you're writing these stories? Because again, there are always whispers on the internet about how much freedom you really get with your book. And then there's the reality. And I've heard varying versions of it. So I'm just curious, what it was like for you guys. And Charlene, if you would like to weigh in, and then we'll go Brianna, Khalees, Crystal, Kai, Julian. There we go. Now you know the order.
I gotta say, it's a little hard to weigh in too much because I'm still with my publishers, who
Fair.
are like wonderful, and I love them, and they're so supportive. There has been a few issues that, I felt I wasn't able to write what I wanted to write, what I felt was important to the story. And I think it was more about their fear of reader perception. And maybe even, my book is very much touted as a book club book. And so there were some things in there that they thought would just like push it beyond what a lot of people who are interested in book club books are comfortable with. But then there are other ways in which they just absolutely left it up to me. So my next book, which is already out in Canada and is coming to the States in October, I actually wanted a sensitivity reader. It had to deal a lot with biracial identity. And I haven't read books that dealt with that. And I hadn't talked about that experience. And so I was putting it into my novel and thinking like, are people going to be like, what is she talking about? And I wanted a sensitivity reader, and my editors were just kind of like, we trust you. And if you're writing honestly, then this is your experience and you're a biracial person. So we're fine with that. So in some ways, it's just like so supportive and so amazing. But there have been a few issues. Yeah.
We can leave it at that. Safe space. So, Brianna, what about your experience? Like, how much flexibility pushback do you get with your books?
I actually have not run into, well, as far as it comes to the content in my books, I have not come in contact with pushback from my publishers, which is a very lucky thing, I think. I try to follow there's this interview that Toni Morrison did with a white interviewer.
I know what
who
you're
was
talking about.
asking, yes, of course, everybody always
Yep.
like,
I know the one.
Yeah.
Come on, yeah. That says, and she tells the interviewer, you don't know how incredibly racist it is for you to ask me to center white people in my story, basically. And I basically feel the same way. Black people are the center of my universe, my day-to-day life. Like, that is what I come in contact with. That is what I prefer to. I do prefer to be with my people. And so when it comes to my writing my books, I am doing that. I wrote the Briarcliff Prep, and that one is about a historically Black boarding school, trying to basically integrate the HBCU experience and the experience of a young girl who is experiencing domestic violence. The pushback that I have gotten I would say would come from certain reviewers who want to know why there is not a single white character in my books. And so they're not there because it's, I like to say, it's my pen and I do what I want.
I love that. I'm taking that. Okay.
By all means.
Yeah.
So I have not gotten pushback there. And even when I went over to Scholastic and published As Long as We're Together, which is IP, they just came to me with the general idea of Party of Five. And I said, okay, I'm going to make them Black. And they were like, no problem whatsoever. So that was, though I haven't had issues when it comes to that. When it comes to covers, I am still with my publishers. Like Charlene said. So there have been things that arise, but I kind of approach them all with, you're basically going to get about 75% of what you ask for most of the time. And so you have to pick and choose your battles. There are some things that's just like not worth fighting over. There are other things just as like, I'm unfortunately going to have to put my foot down. And so sometimes there's pushback against the pushback. And you kind of just have to write it out and let your agent know, I am so unhappy. It's a balance. It's a game of balance is all I'll say about it. But things can get difficult because we're going up against billion-dollar corporations as one individual person. So
Yeah. I'll echo what Brianna said. when it comes to writing Black stories, especially if you want to be authentic, my story is about two kids growing up in Memphis, where I grew up.
Mhm.
I grew up in Memphis, and white people were not in my. If you don't know, Memphis is a very Black city in the city, and I lived in the city. And for me, growing up, as a teenager, white people were, the tourists that you saw coming to Graceland, because Graceland is in Whitehaven, which is a very Black neighborhood where I grew up and where the book is based. Or, once I got to college, I went to a local PWI, and that's when I, integrated, I would say, with white people. So when I write a story about Black teenagers who go to Black public schools, who, it's going to be, they're going to be, everybody's going to be Black. So I think when you talk about that, it's like, how authentic do you want the story to be? So I just wanted to add that. But to answer the question, my experience with Finding Jupiter, which was the first book that I ever wrote, and the only one that's published so far, I had a kind of charmed experience. I really didn't get a lot of pushback as far as content. Where the pushback happened was once the book got to copy edits, to line edits. Like I said, it's a book in Memphis. If you know Memphis, there's a very specific dialect, very specific accents, a very specific way that teenagers speak. And so copy edits was where I saw the most back and forth, where they were like, are you sure you want to say this way? Yes, I'm sure I want to say it that way. Are you sure? Should we leave this? Yes, we should leave that in. This is what that means. People who read it will get it. People who don't will look it up, and then they'll get it, So that was really the gist of the type of pushback that I got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to table it because it's not about me, but I have thoughts. We'll come back to it. Crystal.
I would say I didn't really get pushback on content either. I think I was really lucky that I was able to tell the story the way that I wanted to. I did get a lot of questions to kind of elaborate on things. Kind of like Liz was saying, is that if you know, you know. But my book was being marketed to a very wide audience. So they're like, okay, well, people who are not in the Black community won't understand this. Could you kind of set it up so that they can get it from the context clues of the page to make it make it easier for people who would not have this lived experience, who would not have Black parents, who have certain ways of doing things, so that they can understand the context and maybe how the relationship between parents and children would be like, or between girls would be like. So I got questions to help bring readers along the story a little easier. And then when it came to the cover, the designers were great. They would send me sketches along the way, ask me if I liked certain things, what I wanted in the background. I got samples for fonts and different things. So I think I was very lucky that I was really part of the process. I would say I was the one that gave a little bit of pushback. When they were designing covers for other territories, they didn't use the in-house artists. So there's some covers that needed some guidance on how to, accurately portray Black people in picture. So, I was the one giving the pushback in that situation. Hey, I want people to look at this cover and be able to see themselves in it and not feel like we're making a caricature of Black people. This 1910 opulence did exist, and there were wealthy Black people. So I don't want it to look like a cartoon. I wanted it to look like a representation of something that really existed, so that people who pick it up know that this is part of our history and not something that's just made up for entertainment purposes only.
And I love that, because knowing that it's real is important, because it's just I feel like there's a whole aspect of, I'll say, the world that's just oh, Black people own houses? What? When? How? I don't believe you, homie. And it's just wait a second. Let's unpack that. Let's unpack that for a moment, shall we? But like you said, I'm glad that you push for that. And it's just no, these were real people. It's not a joke. It's not made up. It's not completely fiction in that way. It's based off of real people. So let's treat it with that respect that it deserves. So love that. Love that. Kai, how was your pushback? You talked about it. You brought this up actually.
I'm the troublemaker. No, you know what? My first novel, which also like Cleese is the only novel that I have published so far, is I had a very charmed experience. I signed with Tiny Rep, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House, in 2020. And the person who founded the imprint was Phoebe Robinson, and she started the imprint after like being told that her books were too niche to sell because they were about Black women's experiences. So, you know, getting a book deal from someone who understood exactly what my experience was extremely helpful. And then my editor for that book was also a Black woman. And I didn't have to fight anybody for anything in that experience. I love working with Tiny Rep. You know, I worked with Amber Oliver as my editor, and I just felt like we were just, you know, on the same page. The content of the book that's out in the world is very similar to the version of the book that I was tinkering around with all those years. So I felt really good about that experience. Where I started to have some struggles was when I was working on my second book, which has just now gone under contract recently. But for several years, I was kind of like going back and forth with trying to figure out how to tell that story. And at that time, you know, one of the challenges was it's a young adult novel and it features an assault on a Black kid. And, you know, my agent and I were kind of just getting some preliminary feedback from folks in the industry about the book. And some of the feedback we were getting was, well, you know, this has kind of already been done. And, you know, people were telling me that it had been done too often. And, you know, at some point I like really went down the rabbit hole and wrote out to my agent, like, here are all the stories where a Black, you know, young person is assaulted by an authority figure. And I was able to list how every single one of them was different than my book, like very different, you know, like inherently different. Like mine takes place in a school and mine features this kind of dynamic. Mine is a queer love story. There's all these different things that are going on that I have not seen in these other books. And I'm like, you know, it's kind of, we talk about how I feel like, you know, white authors can write the same book a million times and it's like a different book. Black authors write the same book as two other Black authors, and it's like, we already got that book. And I'm like, what? You don't already have this book. I just wrote it. So
whole conversation right there.
It was a long journey with the second book to be able to get it a home. And I found the best home for it. My editor is going to be Stacey Barney at Nancy Paulson Books. Is my first young adult. Another Black woman editor. I feel very lucky. You know, as soon as I got on the call with Stacey, she started talking about the book in a way that let me know that she knew exactly what I was trying to do, and she wanted me to do that. So the pushback I had was kind of in the in between moments, but I've been very lucky and supported so far with my publishing team.
I love that for you guys. Okay, Jillian.
I love that you also landed at Nancy Paulson because they put out great books. So yay, Kai! I'm so happy about that. Yeah. So for me, I think I've been very fortunate on the editorial side. I haven't had any pushback. If anything, I've had editors come to me and say, "Hey, it looked like you were trying to go here with something, but then you backed off. Do you want to talk about that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't know if I should go there." So I've had very like encouraging, like, "Hey, if this is what you want to talk about, don't shy away from it. Do it." So I've been very fortunate. I've had great editors who, when I get that bad copy editor, because we all get them, they'll have that paragraph long thing, and then you'll just see under there from my editor, "Stet." You know, I don't even have to worry about, you know, that comment where they just did not get it. But on the other side, the cover side is where I think I've had to do a little nudging to my agent, like, "Hey, this is like, you can't put my Black and brown people in Black and brown clothes on the cover like that. It's just like, this is not looking great." So yeah, I've had to do some finagling there. I didn't have to do that when I actually had a Black artist who did my cover, and he got it. But you know, that's part of the industry. You know, you sometimes you have to guide them on the way and say, "Listen, this looks great, but also, did you think about how this would look?" kind of thing. that's the only part where I've had to push back a little bit. But again, I think I've had a really great experience where I've had more encouragement than I've had to fight against things when it comes to trying to tell stories with Black characters.
I love that you guys have positive experience. It gives hope because as someone who's like, I'm indie author, right? But I have the pleasure of talking to people on both sides. So, hearing the less than pleasant stories, I'm really glad that you guys have positive ones and you're like, for the most part, yeah, it was good. So that gives, I think, a lot of hope for anyone listening where it's just like, maybe, but y'all, the horror stories say that this is going to be a really miserable experience. So y'all are like, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question before we get into audience questions. So I guess audience, if y'all have questions, drop them so that we can get to them. But my question for you guys is specifically, what piece of writing advice do you wish that you had earlier on in your career? Charlene, go for it.
Yeah, I think the advice that you hear so often about to be a writer, you need to write every day and you need to have this strong word count is so defeating and so wrong. You can be a writer writing 150 words a day. And so the novel, that I'm here for, Hold My Girl, I started writing it when my daughter was 1 and she was a horrible sleeper. She woke up from naps all the time. And at first, because of my other books, I had these goals of I think it was 2,000 words, 5 days a week. And so I was like, okay, I'm a mom now with a little girl. I'll make it 1,000 words, 4 days a week. And that was just ridiculous. I had no way I could do that. And I was failing all the time and I was feeling awful. And then I said, you know what? Let's make it 300 words, 4 days a week. And that was doable. I could do that in 15 to 20 minutes. And, there were times when I sat down and I only got 150 words, but because I knew I had this really small goal, I was able to sit down and write. Whereas if I had a goal of 1,500, I would have known there was no point. I wouldn't have done it. And so it's just getting words on the page is the most important thing, not worrying about whether they're crappy or not, especially for a first draft. If you want to be a writer, you can find the time. I was doing 300 words, you could do 150 words. And making sure that you're not thinking you have to do it every day, because who can do something every day like that, right? Things are going to come into your life. And when you can't, if you have large goals that you can't meet, then you're going to feel like a failure. So set your goals small. And some days I wrote 1,500 words because my daughter just happened to have a good nap. And then I was already sitting there able to do it.
I love that. Love that, especially since not going to name any names, but there is popular advice that says that you have to write every day. And I like that you're debunking that. I support that.
I wrote a 130,000 word book initially, before querying it, in a largely 15 to 25 minute chunks.
There you go. It's accomplishable. All right, Kai, I saw your hand go up. What you got for us?
Yeah, no, I love what Charlene is saying. I was going to say the same exact thing. I'm also a mom. I have 3 kiddos. And even if I wasn't a mom, I tell my students that same thing all the time, just set goals that make sense for you. So since I'm not going to say your same answer, I will also add on to that, figure out what works for you and then do that. I think a lot of writers, when we start writing, we're listening to other writers' advice and then we're trying to do that thing. And I'm a person, I read a million craft books. I love reading craft books. I just really enjoy it because I just like to hear other people's perspectives about how they write. But I have to watch out for falling into the trap of then trying to do exactly what they're telling me to do, trying to do what they're telling me worked for them. Because sometimes I'll get lost in that. And then if it doesn't work for me, I'll feel like I'm failing somehow. Versus being able to read it. And I'm reading a book now, and in it, the author said, either way, I want this book to be useful to you, either because you read the things I say and you're like, this works for me exactly, or because you read these things and you try them and they don't work for you. And you're like, whoo, I know that does not work for me. Here's what does work for me. So that's one of the things I'm also always telling my students is spend time with yourself as a writer, figuring out what works well for you. Which writing sessions do you have that make you super creative? Which writing sessions do you have where you're very focused, where you put out a big word count in a little amount of time? and what were you doing then? How did you accomplish that? What was happening? And then try to, write those things down and know, like, okay, whenever I can go here and write in this environment or do this or do that, that's a really good session for me. And then no, you're not gonna be able to have those dream sessions all the time. When you can have your dream sessions, have those. And in the in-between, just like Charlene said, I just try to get a little writing done. Sometimes it's on my Google Doc on my phone while I'm sitting at a doctor's appointment waiting or something, and I just wrote on my phone for 15 minutes. That still counts, so that's what I would say.
I love that. I love it so much, specifically because again, talking to people, I have had the pleasure of talking to a lot of authors at different stages, and it's exactly that, writing, any words count. Like if it's 1 word, 1,000 words, 2,000 words, whatever, they count. But then also pinpointing and paying attention to what you're doing, because being able to replicate that is, I think, something that more people should definitely hear at the beginning, where it's just like, what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for you. Some people can get up at I think in the last session, she said that she got up at 2 a.m. I was like, girl, love that for you. But I was also like, I can't. But if it works for you, 7. She goes. I think it was. I can't remember who it was, but I know she said that she went to bed at like 7 p.m. and then she got up at like 2 a.m. to write, because she likes to write when the rest of the world is still sleeping. And I was like, that makes sense. And it falls exactly into what you were saying, Kai. Like, if that's how it works best for you, go for it. And then also we got our final thoughts warning. So I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna let y'all get y'all's in, because this is about y'all. We're highlighting y'all. Anyone else want to share any advice they wish they had gotten at the beginning?
I can say my editor for my Scholastic book, As Long as We're Together, her name is Mallory Cass, and she was the author of the 100 series, and just a really delightful person. Early on, when I first became a contracted writer, and being a writer and then having like deadlines and people's jobs depending on you meeting these deadlines and stuff, or at least telling you, I'm going to miss these deadlines, which is important. You should communicate, and let people know what's going on. Because I also have fallen victim to not doing that as well. One time she looked me in my eyes through the computer screen and she said, Brianna, we're writing books, not doing brain surgery. And it just really, really relieved a lot of pressure for me, because I was writing 2 books at once at different stages, going from different points of views and everything. And it was just all jumping up in my head and hard and made me cry quite a bit. And so her saying that, you're right, we're writing books. It's not life or death. It can change lives, and that's important to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, if my mental health isn't good and I'm writing a book about mental health, then how is that going to affect what my writing is?
Yeah.
Facts.
That was fun.
All right.
Yeah.
So we
Perfect
are wrapping up.
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me come back down. That was such an amazing panel, guys. I didn't want it to end, but I'm like, time. It was crazy. A lot of stuff was happening while you were there. So there's a link, guys, that I posted in the chat. It is going to populate everybody over to the next panel, because for some reason it's making me do that. If you're sticking around, please, I'm going to put this group in a green room so you guys can chat and talk it up. And then I'm going to go head over to the next panel and get them started. So everybody, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. The link is in the chat if you can see it. The next panel will start there shortly. So thank you so much for participating in this amazing historical fest. And I'm so appreciative to you. I will send you all to the green room, so you don't go anywhere. You'll go into the green room to chat, and bye everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye.